Thank you, Azur, very much, and thanks all of you for showing up and for the invitation that I got to come up here. As Azur has been saying, I head the Fundación Neotrópica. Fundación Neotrópica is actually one of the oldest environmental NGOs in Costa Rica. It was founded 25 years ago by 3 of the founding fathers of the national park system of the country, and I am working with Neotrópica for the last 3 years. Now, we basically seek to promote the fair and intelligent use of natural resources through initiatives that promote human development. This has been actually a sort of brand that we took ever since we were created. And, by 1985, we were talking about sustainable development pretty much on a trial and error basis. As you know, the concept of sustainability hadn't even been, sort of given an official definition until the late 80s, and Neotrópica was pretty much embracing this novel concept in order to do community work, because Costa Rica at this time was getting buckets of dollars, mostly as a result of the situation in Central America, and because policymakers were seeing foreign aid focused on different areas, including environmental conservation, as a way to keep Costa Rica close to the chest and stable. So we were getting buckets of money and somebody had to spend it, and we started executing projects, some of which were sort of pioneer projects in forestry conservation, for instance. Boscosa is a well-known project along that line. It was a project in which we learned a lot because we made a lot of mistakes. Since then, we've been having different stages at the foundation, and we've been reinventing ourselves in many ways. Now, we have been part of the green story of this, little nation someplace in the center of Central America. One of the reasons I also show this map is because it's not uncommon for people to actually tell me, even people who are professors in universities, tell me, yes, you are from the island. And then I just want to make a full and complete check with you that we are not an island. We are actually part of the continent. We are sort of a residual part of the continent, as our geological history can tell you, but we are part of the continent. And probably our most well-known achievement is this, which is a very ambitious project of establishing a system of protected areas that covers, let's see, how much of Costa Rica is in protected areas? Oh, come on. You've been looking at too much of the marketing material. 10%. 25% is the usual, marketing figure that is given. But what is not marketed, because it's kind of a complex concept to sell, is the fact that the country actually in the mid-90s, around 1996, embraced a model that it calls SINAC, or the National System of Conservation Areas. And what SINAC implies is that the whole country is going to be divided in 11 bioregions, and that those 11 bioregions are going to be managed as such. So the whole landscape, the whole grid of the landscape will be harmonized in a way that the conservation that is happening in the protected area systems will be actually in sort of rhyme with the rest of the land uses that you can find there, which, for instance, in areas like this one here, is quite a challenge, because this area happens to include all of the urban or the largest urban region of Costa Rica, where about half of its population actually lives. So this is one of the reasons why Costa Rica is so well recognized, and we have very progressive biodiversity laws, among them the law of biodiversity, which actually states that in Costa Rica, biodiversity and its products are public property. Therefore, preventing from patenting, for instance, from pharmaceutical companies that may come and take elements from the forests. Life expectancy of 79, very low mortality rates and malaria rates, and about 150,000 tourists per year are coming now from medical tourism, mostly aesthetic medical tourism, because it's cheap. You can get a new nose for a relatively lower rate that you can do in the United States. So all of those things are part of a build-up that was inherited from the welfare state of our nation. This vision of the country was actually presented in a formal way in a book by Stanley Evans since 1995. And Stanley actually sees a progression that comes from the fact that Costa Rica's people had the chance of being educated abroad and the chance of being in touch with naturalists from other countries. Then many of our founding fathers of the national park system came to the United States, saw the model of national parks of the US, and they brought the Yellowstone idea back to our country. We started creating national parks in the country. The biggest push for the efforts of creation of national parks were actually during years of crisis, of economic crisis, during the late 1970s when we had the debt crisis, and the early 1980s when we had the oil crisis. And then, after the late 1980s, we actually started seeing a movement for the private sector and other sectors of society to actually become part of the whole conservation movement, which is the last stage that is interpreted in this interpretation of the environmental history of the country. To top it, last year we actually ranked as #1 in the Happy Planet Index. And then we started being labeled as the most sustainable and happy country of the planet. So everything that Azur was saying is just a futile effort, and if you have seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, you will understand right now that I am the Black Knight, and I will probably be losing my limbs in a minute, and I will be on the ground saying, let's call it a draw, right? Well, let's scratch the surface just a little bit. Recent studies have actually shown us that there are significant regional differences in the way that people are perceiving their level of health between 6 regions of the country, and that this may suggest that actually this feeling of wellness, this feeling of well-being that we kind of attribute to the aggregate indicators of Costa Rica may not be the same in every part of the country. The reach of the healthcare system, the reach of the socialized healthcare system it seems to not be the same in every area. And this map also shows us that some of the areas where we actually have a lower index of social development, like up here in the north, some parts of the Caribbean, and certainly the South Pacific region of the country, where we do a lot of our work, are areas that have relatively lower levels of public expenditures in public health. Now, if we add to that the fact that the index of human poverty of the country also shows us 2 realities, a Central Valley that is much more well off, the urban areas being way better in terms of poverty than, for instance, this area of the South Pacific or the north part of the country, or curiously enough, one of the areas of higher tourist development in the nation, which is the region of Guanacaste in the Nicoya Peninsula. We start understanding this sort of bipolar reality that the country has. And for me, one of the most concerning coincidences is the fact that if you look at the index of social development and you compare it to the locations of higher concentration of protected areas, there is a certain coincidence between the two. So it seems to be that it would be very hard to actually be an advocate for conservation unless you are thinking that conservation can happen in places where human beings are not located, and you are into the business of stimulating migration as a form to consolidate conservation. I believe that that is no longer something that is desirable or seen with good eyes by either the advocacy or the scientific community. So this is certainly a concerning coincidence. Add to that the migration factor. It is not a coincidence that Costa Rica right now has 5% of its population living in the United States. Popular mythology says that Costa Ricans actually come to the US and that they all adapt because we are very well educated. Well, let me just throw a figure at you. Of the 250,000 Costa Ricans that live in the United States, only 70,000 are documented. Now, if you look at the area that they mostly come from, coincidentally, it is this area of the country, the South and South Pacific. So this dispels the myth that Costa Rica does not have economic refugees. In fact, we do. And gradually they are becoming a more important part of the cultural landscape of the United States, to the point that we already have cultural networks. For instance, one of the areas of more inhabitants of Costa Ricans in the United States is Patterson, New Jersey. A place where you can find a rarity, which is that you have more than one Costa Rican restaurant. Okay? Costa Ricans, since we have been few, it used to be very hard to actually find a Costa Rican restaurant in the US. Well, you can find some of those in LA, but in Patterson, New Jersey, you can find several. And you can also find a radio station that rebroadcasts the Sunday matches of the National Soccer League. Okay? That means that you have established cultural and social networks that are actually evolving, and that there is a higher amount of population that is actually coming in this direction. Now, we have external immigration that is coming to the country also. Nicaraguans and Colombians are coming and are also concentrating in places where the standard of living is higher. So they are not exactly becoming new colonizers in the areas of lower social development in the rural areas. They're actually coming to our urban areas and to the areas where there is more agricultural work available. And we have our own problem of internal migration, and the internal migration is also happening towards the Central Valley. Now, looking at the Happy Planet Index, even there, we do have to think a little bit. The Happy Planet Index, I think, comes from a very desirable model, the model whereby planetary resources are inputs that we try to use in order to have long and happy lives instead of a continuous growth. I believe I'm in a safe place as to say that continuous growth is not necessarily a desirable objective, right? Now, when looking at the Happy Planet Index of Costa Rica, there are two things to think about. Oh, that's what I have. Okay. One of them is the fact that life satisfaction is something that is different to evaluate in a culture that sees saying no as a very unpopular thing. Okay? There is a cultural bias against saying no in Costa Rica. Life expectancy is credible in the sense that it is actually something that we get from the welfare state that we used to have. And then the ecological footprint is actually what prevented Costa Rica from having a much higher score. Costa Rica has I'm not going to extend too much on this, has gradually been acquiring a consciousness of higher end consumption. And you can see it when we call this ecotourism. This little resort where you can actually come and have everything done for you includes, among other features, a nice white sand beach in a region that doesn't have white sand. So, that kind of upper end consumption is being stimulated as the image that the country is selling. And the result is that maybe our ecological footprint is not shooting up to the sky. We are by no means close to the level of the US. I mean, we are somewhere around 2.5 and 3 hectares per person. But we do have a decreasing biocapacity that we have overpassed all the way from the late 1980s. So we do operate right now on an ecological deficit basis. Okay, we do import carrying capacity. Yeah.
I've got a question about the previous graph.
Yes.
Is it declining? The biocapacity declining because population is going up?
Population has been going up, and indeed not necessarily at an increasing rate within the local population. Actually, our population growth rate is tending to stabilize as of the endogenous population. The migration is a factor there that is somehow affecting it. So it's a hard call in the sense that right now some of that migration is starting to go back to its country of origin. Okay, so I don't know if I could say that the trend is going to be based on population. I think that certainly the consumption rates per capita are increasing.
Let me follow through on that. That's a per capita graph.
Mm-hmm.
So if the biocapacity of the whole country were constant, the green line would be a graph of 1 over population.
Correct.
I think that's where he was headed.
Correct.
The thing has dropped by about a factor of 2.5. So the question is, how much of it's population and how much of it is destruction of biocapacity?
Costa Rica had some of its highest deforestation rates, for instance, between the late 50s and the early 90s. And it was after the 1990s where you started seeing figures that indicated that there was some afforestation. So for instance, with regards to that, we have seen biocapacity decreasing with regards to forest cover. That's one indicator. Other indicators that are in there are available lands for agriculture, which in terms of productivity have decreased. And there's actually a pretty good book from Charlie Hall that shows this, Quantifying Sustainable Development. So those are two where I can tell you that there is a decrease in the biological factors that goes alongside with the increase of population.
And what about the number of tourists?
Costa Rica actually gets about half of its population added in terms of tourists, about 2 million tourists per year on a population. It has been increasing steadily. Last year we had a bit of a dip, but now it's back, to an increasing rate.
So might it be connected to the
Yes.
decline?
Yes. The problem is that you see here, the transient population is not accounted for when it comes to footprint statistics. They use the country population. Now, it does have an effect over the pressure on the resources, but I don't think it's accounted for in this type of accounting. Yeah. So this graph, I'm sorry, it's in Spanish. It's an infographic that was published in the main newspaper of the country, and I think it's good because it allows us to show what I just said, some of the implications of this when it comes to wetlands. This is the main watershed of the nation, okay? It's called the Grande de Tárcoles watershed. It flows all the way from the Central Valley into the Central Pacific Ocean, okay? Now, one of the challenges that the Central Valley has, or the central urban area has, is that we don't have a water treatment system, okay? So all the water of the waste from industrial effluents or house effluents is going untreated, virtually untreated, into the lower part of the watershed. Okay. Now, right here, right next to this, to the main river that takes it to the ocean, is a national park that has substantial wetlands that are actually doing what wetlands do. You know, they are the kidneys and the liver to this watershed, and they are cleaning it just enough as for there to be enough alligators or crocodiles. I'm sorry, as to be a main tourist attraction in a bridge that crosses through here. It's the famous Crocodile Bridge, where you can see, you know, these huge creatures right there alongside tires that float by, women's nylons, a whole bunch of solid waste. And if you are, you know, curious enough, which is not frequent, you can go and take one of the small tours that happens in boats here that can take you into this mangrove reserve. This mangrove reserve is extremely important because this is where the macaws that live in this national park actually spend the night. They like to go and fly and spend the night here. Now, you can go into the canal of this mangrove reserve there, and you can, you know, see the macaws up above. You can see nice pink-looking, pink flamingo-looking birds that are walking around, and they are sort of stepping around the tires and stepping around the women's nylons, you know, plastic bags all up to here. Okay? Now, the reason why this area actually doesn't attract too many foreign tourists to its tours is because of the trash. Okay? Add to that the fact that every time that we go and survey down here the population of this particular area who are fishermen, they tell you that every day they have to go further out into the ocean in order to have any catch because of the amount of waste that is coming out of this watershed. So this, for me, illustrates, you know, that huge contradiction that happens in Costa Rica between conservation, the areas that are being conserved, and, you know, the area of the urban center. This is a typical case of environmental injustice. And, you know, just like that, in the South Pacific, we have a similar situation. As you saw, you know, this is an area of high poverty where you have this type of development that is being, you know, introduced right now by amenity migrants that are coming to develop real estate and develop tourism resorts, creating this type of impact in the waters of marine national parks. This area is the most important wetland that Costa Rica has on its Pacific side, probably the largest wetland of its type in the whole hemisphere, in the Pacific of the whole hemisphere, the Terra-Sierpe wetland. It includes two sections. One of them is a mangrove section, and the other one is more of an inland wetland type ecosystem. The type of development that you saw is actually pressuring this region in the north side. Then, in order to export energy to Mexico, the government is building a hydroelectric dam up the watershed. And in order to stimulate a larger scale tourism, they are building an airport right there. Now, I don't think you need a degree in engineering to understand the problems of putting an airport there when it comes to a wetland. Traffic is going to be very high, right? So, add to that the fact that this wetland in particular had no management plan. So, not only is it being threatened, but it doesn't have any viable management mechanism that can establish, you know, how it should be managed in order to protect it fully. This particular area for us, and the area that we were talking about before in the main watershed of the country, represents a typical situation where environmental conflicts are bound to exist because there is an uneven distribution of the costs and the benefits of conservation. And that is actually what we try to focus on. Now, in terms of ecological economic theory, we feel that there has been a lot of discussion as of what we should pay attention more to. The biophysical aspect, the natural capital aspect, or the actual economy. And we have been somehow ignoring that the key actually may be in what we call the social cultural capital and the empowerment of that sector in order to actually become an increasingly resilient sector that can adapt successfully to the changes that are happening between these two dimensions. So in Fundación Neotrópica, we actually focus our work in two areas: promoting ecological democracy and focusing on conflict resolution, ecological conflict resolution. In that sense, we like to speak of sustainable development as something that you build piece by piece, more of a grassroots type of approach than a top-down policy design approach. As I said, our main focus is the unfair distribution of costs and benefits, and we have 3 programs that we actually implement in order to try to achieve these goals: community empowerment, sustainable productive solutions, and global environmental citizenship. We seek synergies between new sciences, and we operate mostly based on center models. In these center models, we try to have incidence within the regions that we work with at a more localized level. We feel that our reach is way more effective if we actually focus our work in these centers, where we actually mix the resources that we can attract from research and from education in programs that seek to actually train and empower people from the regions that we work with. Well, we have brought many students to Costa Rica, and we actually think that they're a very important part of making this mission happen. Anyway, out of our center in the Osa Peninsula, we run many of our programs and many of our projects. One of these projects is actually part of our participatory wetlands conservation projects array that was developed in joint partnership with UVM, and it is this project, the project Ecoticos. I will also briefly mention what we did with this other project that was supported by the Dutch government. Back to the area that we were focusing on, as I said, we had a problem with these mangroves here, in the sense that they are threatened and that they have several challenges to overcome. The Ecoticos project, as Azur was saying, was a joint venture between different institutions that we based on Donella Meadows' idea of levers for change. As part of this, Fundación Neotrópica was in charge of one particular area, which was an area of valuation. And, what do you do with the big number? You hear a lot the criticism that the Costanza approach of the big number is good, but what do you do with it? So what happens when you actually have calculated this humongous figure, and you have realized, okay, well, this is how much we think that there is in terms of environmental services, and this is how much we feel that there is in terms of carbon. What is this good for? So we actually applied in this case a model of integrating the different schools of valuation of ecological economics, and we threw in, aside to the environmental service valuation component, a multi-criteria analysis component. What for? Well, basically what we wanted to see is how we could internalize the values that we estimated. How could we actually make people aware of the fact that they could use some of the value of environmental services, and that this could become into a tangible benefit for them, okay? So we actually took the value and we integrated it into different development scenarios that included the threats that were actually being confronted by the region. We threw in there, okay, well, there may be an airport. There may be actually a dam. There may be, tourism development. It is unreal to think that none of these is going to happen. So what would you prefer? What is the menu of things that you prefer? Would you think that a management plan is something that is appropriate to have here or not? Would you rather have no control over the use of the wetland in order to fully develop your ventures or not? And that way we were able to actually introduce into the different development scenarios the environmental service valuation, so they could see something tangible in which they could actually give an opinion. We developed the whole process of workshops where we actually combined the Delphi methodology with focal groups. And in order to control for bias, we actually organized several rounds of workshops. For instance, in our first round of workshops, as it is logical, we had mostly young people, okay, and hippies showing up. And therefore, we made a second round actually to try to incorporate people that were from sectors that would be normally opposed to, conservation measures, which we actually did. It was a fairly strong participatory process that ended up with a large community gathering twice, where people actually got to, first of all, vision what their dream community would be. They had the liberty of including or not including the mangroves or the wetland. And then they had to vote on which of the scenarios they preferred. Okay? We had ballots and whatnot, and they actually expressed their opinion in these ballots where they ranked how they felt with the scenarios. Interestingly enough, here are our most significant results here on the left. The scenarios that got the higher rankings were all the scenarios that had the management plan in it. Okay? We did several tests to control for potential surveyor bias, induced. And in both the scenarios, we actually got that people definitely were preferring the scenarios that had the management plan as part of the development solution. Well, we did the whole NIADE analysis and threw in there, for instance, or were able to see the potential coalitions between the different stakeholder groups, and we got the rankings according to the NIADE methodology. Now, what was valuable of this process is that the results were timely enough as for us to be asked by the conservation area authorities to bring them to the technical session in which the management plan was discussed for its approval. The management plan had a lot of opposition from the local government because they thought that people were against it because it curtailed development possibilities. Our results were presented there, and actually it was the mayor of the county that presented the motion to approve the management plan. So we had a good tangible result out of this analysis where we saw, community advocacy actually being translated into an analysis that was scientifically credible and, that could have a result in the policy discussion. Yes?
Bernardo, would you say a little bit more about which 6 scenarios were compared and which
Yes.
values were used to evaluate them?
What we did is that we tried to extrapolate the value based on the percentages that we would think would change given 6 scenarios that were chosen by experts initially and that then were validated through the focal groups. We thought that the mixture of scenarios that came from all the alternatives was too complicated for the communities to manage. I mean, there's no way in which people can choose between 30 plus scenarios, okay? So we went to the experts and we said, okay, which of these scenarios, let's say management plan plus airport, airport plus hydroelectric, hydroelectric plus tourism development, do you think would be the more plausible, okay, and which one do you think would be the most unlikely? Based on that initial choice, we went to focal groups, and in those focal groups we also had people, you know, saying, well, what do you think about what the expert said? Do you think they're completely lost, or, you know, is it worthwhile to actually throw in another one of the scenarios that we have left out? Based on that, we cleared it, and then we had 6 scenarios that we had them choose. The scenarios were, and they are up here, PM plus D is management plan plus, PM plus D is management plan plus the dam. TBR is tourism and real estate. PM plus TBR plus D is management plan plus tourism and real estate plus the dam. Dam plus tourism and real estate, but at a decreasing rate. Management plan plus tourism and real estate, and then the airport plus tourism and real estate. Those are the ones that were sort of the 6 that were seen as the more plausible ones. Okay. For the sake of time, I'm not going to elaborate too much on one of the other parts that I had for this. I mean, one of the nice things that I think we concluded is that this participatory exercise was very, very valuable for us to be able to influence policy. Now, there's this other project that I'm not going to stop right now that just had a much higher element of community execution, actually, than community advocacy in terms of conservation, and, you know, it had a bunch of results. The point of presenting them together is because from our experience there, we have seen that there are, you know, 2 important parts to this community conservation thing. And, you know, even when you don't have community management, you can have strong community advocacy, and it can be also effective. And we see these 2 projects as one having more management, less advocacy, and needing more advocacy, and the other one as having less advocacy but more management. So we think that these 2 experiences could complement each other, and we're actually seeking through this experience that we're developing right now with that Azur was talking about with the EU to be able to do this on a higher basis.
Hold on, hold on.
Yeah. Yes?
So I had a question about when you're saying advocacy in this sense, is that after all the citizens have come together and decided on they think this is the best approach, so they're going to go advocate for it, or is it groups, different groups coming saying this is what we want this should be?
It is advocacy expressing what the will of the
After the
communities have been.
Right.
Mhm.
I mean, we walked into the.
Yeah, we walked into the issue, you know.
Right.
So we were able to bring this expression of the community will into the issue.
So would you say before the advocacy you have to establish consensus, and then they
I think we're about to find that out with this project, actually. I think that the whole, you know, understanding and systematizing of these experiences is a very important part of understanding if the causalities go in that direction, as you're saying. Yeah. So this is what we're going to be doing based on Elinor Ostrom's idea. We're actually trying to see or present community conservation as an alternative to market solution and individual incentives, or a complement to market solutions and individual incentives. And this project is going to help us very much in understanding better what you were saying. You know, this is the list of partners. And the case studies, Zur already mentioned, you know, that 3 of them are located in Brazil, and one of them is our case study in Costa Rica. Now, let me just run through this. Something that I just want to mention very briefly is that another opportunity came to us just a few months ago. And it is that we were invited to participate as a group of NGOs in order to help the Costa Rican government with an issue that arose in October of 2010, when, you know, in an area that has 2 huge wetlands, in the border between Nicaragua and Costa Rica. The Nicaraguan government made an incursion into an area that they claimed was part of Nicaragua and built a canal between the San Juan River, which is in the border with Nicaragua and Costa Rica, and this little lagoon here. This is only an area of, about 550, maybe 600 acres, okay? The significance of the area, though, is that it is an essential area for the regulation of the water flows and mud flows of a much larger wetland. And according to the Ramsar Commission that visited to evaluate the damage that was caused in building this canal, the potential impact could extend way beyond what they call the direct impact area into the indirect impact area, which is over 50,000 acres, okay? So it's a fairly substantial part of this wetland on the Costa Rican side. Additional concerns of Costa Rican natural scientists are the fact that if the flow of sediment is significant enough, it may break the barrier of this estuarine lagoon, and it may take sediments all the way down to the coral reserves in the South Caribbean of Costa Rica. So, we were called. This is also one of those very isolated areas that have very little social development. We were called to be part of this coalition of NGOs and university institutions to actually organize awareness campaigns. And we've been working in actual alliance with the Costa Rican government in raising an awareness that has allowed us to make even massive events to get the word out about the importance of wetlands in Costa Rica in general, based on this opportunity. And as part of this opportunity, we have also been invited to start implementing this methodology that we developed for the Ecoticos project with this problem in specific. So we already have used, the same methodology that we used in the Ecoticos project to estimate the big number, the huge number, the significant number. And comparing it to Costa Rica's and Nicaragua's GDP, one can start seeing that the numbers, depending on your scenario, depending on if you use or not use a discount rate, can be fairly significant. But for us, the most important thing is that we are starting to be able also to push towards the integral approach that the Ecoticos project took, and to start getting stakeholders involved in terms of resolving this problem. We have been pushing the agenda that this cannot be a solution that is only achieved through governments, but that you have to actually include in this not only international technical know-how, but also the people that live around these areas that should have a say on a conflict of this kind. And fortunately, the media has started reacting. This is a page from a newspaper that just came out, where actually they are quoting us, holding the position that, the big number is nothing unless we actually get the people who should be in this discussion involved. And our Minister of Foreign Affairs actually reacting and saying that, yeah, we should do this, and the Nicaraguan ambassador to Costa Rica also endorsing such a position. So we feel that this window of opportunity that is being opened by this discussion in the country is actually also opening an opportunity for this partnership between Neotrópica and UVM to actually promote this innovative application of a mixture of valuation for the purposes of taking it down to a more participatory level. So, questions?
Then we have time for a few questions.
The scenario, okay, because what we threw in there were the community rankings plus other factors, okay? We had some biophysical factors that were estimated by one of our groups. the CMAR of University of Costa Rica, the Center for Marine Studies, also did some estimates of impacts that we actually threw into the NIADA matrix. And we also used the changes in value that we had estimated. The most desirable scenario of the ones that we showed them was the management plan plus a hydroelectric dam, yeah, of the 6.
So no airport.
The airport was actually the most unpopular solution. Yeah, yeah, that was consistent in the data.
Bernardo,
Yes.
all those scenarios, together with the other biophysical information, did you also provide like cost information, like how much it would cost to the community, or I mean to the municipalities, or was that left out?
How much it would cost to the municipality to what?
Well, the different options if you
Did
had
we
to
do
build.
a benefit cost analysis? That's what you're saying?
Well, if you provided actually the participants with this kind of information, whether if you combine, for example, the airport and the hydro, this would generate this much revenues and the number of jobs and things like that.
Each one of the scenarios was actually what we requested, because for people it is really not, I mean, when you throw out a big number, it also, is reflected on their disposable income. So what we did is that we actually translated those parameters, ecological, social, and economic parameters of each scenario into qualitative explanations. So yes, they did see, for each one of the scenarios, they saw a board that had, okay, this is what would happen. Jobs would increase because of this. Jobs may decrease because of this, because in some cases you have scenarios that combine two possibilities, right? I mean, you may have occasional jobs or seasonal jobs that are coming with the hydroelectric dam, but you may be losing jobs in the actual areas where you have fisheries in the mangrove. So all of that, yes, we did explain in terms of a qualitative presentation. Yeah. Yes.
So how do you ensure buy-in by the government or the decision makers who, so you said the airport is the most unpopular scenario. So how are the developers just going to say, okay, we're not going to have that airport anymore, or how do you kind of ensure buy-in after you go through this process?
Well, that's why I said that this whole border thing has turned into a window of opportunity, because right now we have a national discussion about wetlands, okay? And right now, let me tell you this, the government went about 10 to 12 points down in its popularity index, and it happens to be that the issue in which they received a higher qualification as of the public public opinion survey was actually the management of this crisis with Nicaragua. And the management of this crisis with Nicaragua, we have been doing a lot of coming out to the media and saying this type of dialogue is what should prevail between the government and the environmental sector. So that has upped the profile of the government in that particular area. And now it is political capital for them. So I think that we need to actually take this window of opportunity in order to, start discussing about the other wetlands of the country. In fact, the 28th of April, we are, as part of this group, as part of this collective group of NGOs and universities and so forth, we are participating in a discussion about the airport that is going to be happening in the main town of the region where the wetland is located. So I think that is how we push. We push based on the window of opportunity that has been opened by that.
There's
Yes.
also a management plan that we now finally approved
Yes.
with all of our stuff. So
Yes.
if they decide to move forward, they have to go through an
They have
environmental
to-
impact statement, and it ends up being a huge.
They have to abide by the management plan. Yes.
So can you explain how your capital city would not have a waste treatment plant?
No,
No.
I cannot. I actually feel ashamed of that fact. It is something that has to do with the fact that we have had an environmental consciousness that has been park-centric. We have very much gained I would say, a consciousness that sort of, I've heard being quoted in other places too, whereby you feel that somebody's conserving something, so you know, just feel that something is happening, so that's okay. And the money for the water treatment plant has been there for a little while. It has been mostly in efficacy of the governments to be able to execute the money and to build it. And the lack of capacity of municipal governments to actually coordinate their efforts. So I cannot explain rationally how can that be possible. I think it's shameful. Yeah.
They have 40% of them in conservation and no waste treatment.
We also have millions of gallons of water per second that come from the mountains. You know, all the mountains are protected.
Yeah, I think
and
that's a good point.
all the clouds from the ocean come and hit the mountains, and
That's-
we have an
that's a good
unlimited
point.
supply. We get water straight from the top of the mountains in the city, so
Yeah,
you know it's not like we've
It's
have
a-
Well, but
experienced,
that's for.
we haven't experienced scarcity.
Yes,
on
scarce,
water.
that's a supply of water, we're talking about the wastewater.
well, yeah,
Right,
but you
right.
see,
Everybody has to
that mentality of affluence with regards to water, I think also has made us careless.
Okay, so the solution to pollution is dilution, is the attitude.
There's-
I guess, yeah, I guess. But now, you know, we are starting to understand that that cannot be that way, you know, because we're falling in a problem. Yes.
But even your book from '88, I was just looking it up, it talked about that problem, the lack of
Mhm.
management of sewage in San Jose and the Park Cordes area. So it's sort of been on the, people have
But I
have
can tell
announced
you.
it, but it wasn't necessarily a
But I can
priority.
tell you that there, I mean, like, we had, how much money was spent on developing this national sustainable development strategy with, you know, Carlos Quesada and all that group that came out in so many publications. How much of that strategy was actually implemented, I can tell you, was always focused on the parks, on, you know, in bio, on private conservation and things like such. We really didn't see a possibility for profiting out of things like managing, you know, the sewage adequately, which can happen, but we just didn't see it. Yeah, it wasn't one of those things that looked attractive. Even, I can tell you that some of the protected areas in the country, at that time and today, still have the remnants of what used to be the San Jose dump inside of one of them, right? I mean, so those contradictions have been there, and there are issues that just have not been taken by the country that remain as part of the, you know, the learning curve in terms of really becoming an ecological democracy.
I had a question about the 4 cases you were talking about that
Mhm.
you're going to use a similar technique, multi-criteria analysis with community groups.
Oh, you mean the CVNet project?
The one that had some in Brazil and one in.
Well, we're not necessarily, I mean, I cannot speak right now for the methodology, I wouldn't want to do that. What we're trying to do is to systematize and see what elements of, you know, some case studies can be transferred to other locations. Yeah, but we haven't decided
Actually,
how much.
they're all for
Yeah.
studies, and they're choosing all the
Yeah.
projects. They have a lot of different
Exactly.
projects. And the project wants to look at if it could be transferred to other communities that face similar problems.
And is Josh Farley involved in that one?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay, 'cause I was trying to figure out if that was one of the case studies was one that one of my graduate students might end up working on.
Yeah.
David, I don't know if he's talked to you about, because I was trying to figure out, if one of them's in the Atlantic Forest
Right.
Yeah,
area? Okay.
the one in the banana.
I don't know, because we haven't, actually Josh and Dave and I haven't been in the same room, where David has to go back and forth between the two of us, and I wasn't sure how his piece fit with the larger project.
No, yeah, I believe that it is one of them. And, you know, it's different policy instruments, different scenarios. I mean, one of them, it involves the value-added tax that they have in Brazil and distributing it in a participatory manner. Another one involves biological corridors. I mean, it's different strategies for let's say, different versions of Ostrom's ideas expressed on the ground.
Okay, well, one more question.
That picture you showed of the resort with the white beach.
Oh.
I presume that this process wasn't used when that was developed. But my question is the system the system now fixed so that that can't happen, or is it still unstable to quick raids by rich outsiders?
Yes, actually, it is documented in a thesis in Oregon State University that is called Tamagringo by Jennifer Lee Pera. That one of the challenges that amenity migration is bringing to Costa Rica is the fact that, in terms of the circles of power, amenity migrants are getting inroads that locals are not getting. So,
What did you call that phrase? Amenity migration?
amenity migration.
Can you explain that term? That's interesting term.
Snowbirds.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the term is not mine, it's Jennifer Lee Pera's term. She calls it amenity migration, and it's basically
They can't afford the Cape or Long Island.
the people that either regularly start coming to a place and establish, your piece of real estate that you're going to be going to every year, 2 years, or 3 years, or the ones that just stimulate the construction of a resort coming back, several times.
I only see one sailboat there. See, if those were all sailboats, then it would be ecological.
There you go.
Sure, if they walk there.
The system. let me tell you, one of the main things that we have right now is the fact that this is what we call the Guanacaste model. Okay, the Guanacaste model of tourism development, which is usually large scale. It usually uproots the communities. In fact, it's a model that is related to less social development happening in the area.
Are these all inclusives? Because those typically take all the money out of the country and just give services.
Many of them are. Now, yes, this Marriott is an all-inclusive. There's other Spanish companies that are also doing the all-inclusives. So part of the challenge of the country right now is that we have several areas that are actually mostly of small and medium-sized type enterprise. Okay, the small and medium-sized type tourism operations are not going to be able to do, ooby-grooby community development resistance to this type of movement unless there is, much more of a country investment in terms of maintaining those options. And the fact is that these models are very much advancing towards the South Pacific, towards the areas close to Corcovado National Park. And they are buying lands to establish these types of outfits. And the establishment of the airport is a key component in trying to establish this model there. So that's the discussion that we're being part of.
Okay, well, thank you, Bernardo, for your presentation, and we'll stick around. You can talk about
And don't forget about the
professional. Well, yeah, and tonight we're gonna go to Daily Clan and have a beer around 5:30. So
Yeah.
if anybody wants
You're welcome
to join us, and Bernardo leaves on Sunday, so we stay at my place. And tomorrow we kind of have an open agenda, so we can do whatever. I'm gonna go hang out. As part of just to share some info,
Oh yeah.
today we started the day at 7:30 a.m. at Pennycluse, meeting with Cynthia Bellevue and her staff to talk about potential interactions with CE and courses abroad and all that stuff. Then after that we came and we spoke to Dean Watson about Bernardo's visit and also trying to find synergies between UVM and Neotrópica and Costa Rica in general. Then after Mayor Watson, we went and we spoke to Dean Vogelman. Same thing, after Dean Vogelman, we expressed, after Dean Vogelman, we went and met with President Fogel as well. And everybody received the idea of furthering this kind of work with lots of enthusiasm. So finally today we're meeting with Jane Koloninski at CDAE to also just present a little bit of this and see where we're headed. But anybody that's interested in getting involved with this Costa Rica idea on a 6-month to 1 year horizon, just talk to us and we'll just go from there.
We also have the 2 reports. One is the multi-criteria analysis report that we're running around, and we hope to submit for publication. And we also have the preliminary report of what we're doing up in the border with Nicaragua. So if you want to get a copy of them, just give me your card and I'll gladly forward an electronic copy for you.
Other local universities also participate.
One thought that I may have mentioned to you, you may or may not have picked it up, was the Communist passed the other day that in trying to follow up on the Mundan project, which we'll talk about later, which addresses this whole question of tropical forestry, deforestation, etc., red or what have you. It was funded by the Ford Foundation. The suggestion was that somebody might go back to the Ford Foundation as part of a follow-up to say, this whole area that you've been funding is now going to be part of a workshop taking place with good sponsorship at UVM Vermont. And is Ford Foundation interested in being part of the funding process to further this, to expand this, develop this very interesting position that London has come up with. And the thought was that if this came from Costa Rica, shall we say, as opposed to coming in from somebody in this country, Ford Foundation does view projects, applicants from the south more favorably than it does domestically. And so the thought was we might use some of this material somehow to bring Ford Foundation into the workshop with a view to then perhaps becoming more involved over time and so on. There's just a thought that we might use this Costa Rica /UVM/GUND effort to
talk about the context of all the competitions. Good, well, thank you everybody.
Thank you.